Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Chris Rossini, our co-host. Chris, good to see you this morning.
Good to see you too, Dr. Paul. Thank you.
Okay, very good. We're going to talk a little bit about economics. We've done that before. We talk about spending, and they continue to do that, so I guess we have to talk about it. And our position is, Chris, as you remember, we're for less spending, not more spending. But our message isn't getting through, so let's try to get our message out there that this kind of spending, although people cheer it on and they're delighted, with this budget that just got passed, but it is indeed a problem. Government's totally out of control, and it looks like the last 3 years hasn't improved things a whole lot in spite of the apparent improvement in the economy. But over the years, when people have asked me to support certain tax programs, whether it's the flat tax or the sales tax or whatever, I usually didn't join because they were missing the point, because I always said spending is the tax. No matter what you do on spending, because you either take it from the people through taxation, or you borrow the money, you print the money, and you do all these things. So it is a tax on, on the people. But I think you could use that analogy really with inflation too. When you spend more money and you run up deficits, that's inflationary. It is inflation because they cannot tax the people. They have no intention on taxing the people. And they're delighted with the counterfeit machine, which is well entrenched. It's been there for a long time, over 100 years. And instead of improving on this and moving in one direction, what they're doing is they're having unbelievably accommodating bipartisanship, and they're all for all the spending, all the printing, and all these things. So, Chris, I'm sure you've looked at this, and there's so many things that you can point out about the inflation problem that we have that's not going to go away until we change our attitudes in Washington.
Right, Dr. Paul. And, this week we saw how reckless and ridiculous the Democrats were with impeachment. But unfortunately, the Trump administration is reckless and ridiculous themselves. They're totally broke, and you're talking about spending, and they pass a $730 billion military spending that has nothing to do with our defense right after the Afghan papers come out, where the Americans are flat out told, you've been lied to for 18 years. They don't know what they're doing, in their own words. But, this was a golden opportunity for the president to say, for 18 years, you've been lied to, ripped off, and I'm going to put an end to it. I wasn't your president 18 years ago. But he didn't do it. $730 billion that they don't have, passed, brush the Afghan papers under the rug. And then he tweets that it would be so great for the Fed to further lower interest rates and quantitative ease. So we're living in a time where the short term absolutely dominates political life. The Democrats would do anything to impeach the president. And at the same time, the president wants to do anything to keep this gigantic bubble going so that he can be reelected.
And what you're saying is there's no reason to limit spending, because that's not popular, but there's every reason to make an excuse for inflating the currency, print more money. And you can get away with it until the counterfeiter is identified and the people get disgusted with counterfeit money. But that hasn't occurred yet, but people should be warned about it. And, our title is Lying About Inflation Won't Make It Right, it won't, make it acceptable. But, I hate always using this word lying, but they do a lot of lying. But they are actually, indifferent to it. They don't even quite, and they're in denial. Oh, yes, that's true. You're making a good point. But in time, we'll deal with that. So this budget that you're alluding to already is, $50 billion more than it was last year. And you mentioned the military. There's more than $20 billion additional money, because we have this Cold War coming, and we have to match the Chinese and match the Russians. And the Russians are having trouble. They have that one aircraft carrier, and it just had a fire in it. and they're going to be building another aircraft carrier. I mean, it's insane on what they do. I mean, I imagine 10% of the firepower we have now could protect us against anybody who would dare threaten us. That of course, would be, under conditions of a different type of foreign policy. But inevitably, the spending continues to go up, and there's now talk inflation. Oh, that's okay. They're in denial. They're lying to us. There's no inflation. We're working hard. We want to devalue the debt by inflating the currency and depreciating the money. That's essentially what they're saying. We want at least 2% inflation rate. That inflation is a sign of a healthy economy. Well, we supposedly have a pretty healthy economy, but some prices aren't going up, and they say, well, then there's no inflation, because they limit their definition to the CPI. If the CPI doesn't go up, then there's no inflation. But I want to put up a chart here in a second. You can go ahead and put that up, Sircon. And this demonstrates in a picture form of why measuring inflation is a joke and is deceptive on purpose. If you look at that, you see above the solid blue line in the middle, that's zero. And the things below that actually are going down. Electronics and TVs, they've been going down for decades. But look at the top line, hospital services. And one thing that it was pointed out is anything that is made in America, anything that's made in America tends to have more price increases. And the things that we can buy from overseas, the prices go down. So there's a tremendous amount of inflation, but people should think about inflation being the increase in the supply of money. Now, there is now a few people who now point out that maybe, like I've mentioned many times, maybe they're not looking at the right signals. And there are a few, even in the conventional financial market, saying, well, maybe we ought to look at the asset prices, and that means the stocks and the bonds. I mean, there's a bond bubble, there's a stock market bubble, and then they say there is no inflation. Exactly what they said in 1929, so there couldn't be a crash, and everything was hunky-dory, and lo and behold, they had a little downturn in the 30s because they were missing the boat, and they didn't recognize that monetary inflation causes distortions. There always has to be correction. So it's not so much that we're clairvoyant, and then people will say, well, when is it going to happen? Well, you don't know, because there's a subjective factor when people panic, when they lose confidence. And like they did in 08 and 09, there was a loss of confidence. But strangely enough, the confidence has been eliminated by the modern monetary theory. That's what we've been following. To think that we worry about the Congress being taken over by the socialists and having modern monetary theory, I mean, that's what we're following now. Just listen to it. Increase spending, don't worry about the deficits, print the money, and you're going to have economic growth, and everybody's going to be happy. Chris, I think there's some shortcomings in that philosophy.
There is, Dr. Paul. And, lying about inflation for politicians is really just like anything else. I mean, that to get elected, you have to lie. It's called campaign rhetoric. It's expected of you. You're supposed to lie to get elected. But then when your very first official lie is when you're sworn in and you take your oath of office. You raise your hand, you swear, you put your other hand on the Bible, people watching, and everybody swears to uphold the Constitution. And nobody does. I could think of maybe 2 people out of 500 plus in Congress that actually take their oath seriously. Only 2 that I could think of. And then they lie to invade country after country, lie about the economy, how it's the greatest ever. So is it really hard? Is it really a stretch for a politician to lie about inflation? Absolutely not. It's probably easier than anything else. So you'll never hear the truth about inflation from Washington or the Federal Reserve.
Well, they don't mention the truth because they understand that's treasonous. It's treason to tell the truth in an empire. But I think it was McConnell was saying when he was discussing the budget, his first thing, when you have divided government, you bring people together and you have to settle on everybody getting less than they want. And it's exactly the opposite. Everybody got exactly what they wanted, and yet they say everybody has to give up a little bit and they get along. And then he was very pleased with the hard work in the Senate and the House, because they made it so they didn't have to go through this continuing resolution again. No more sequestering. So you would extend it on a continuing resolution for 3 months, and then you have to do it over again. They don't have, this is the budget, so no more continuing resolutions. So this was a total victory. Of course, it's a total failure of the system to think about long term about what this is going to lead to. And I once again, the chart that we had up there a minute ago, it shows that it's so unfair, and the middle class suffers the most. And guess who benefits? It's the Wall Street. Even in this budget, there's a lot of people gotten bailed out. Of course, there were some union workers, the miners, I think it was. They had totally bankrupted their pension funds. So they had a huge bonus. So you treat the military-industrial complex, you give subsidies to the corporation, you have to do it to the big unions, but you don't do it to the small businessman, and you don't do it for the guys that work for small businesses, which is a lot of people, but they're excluded. And then what do we end up? We see in the consequence of this, we see social disorder and the justifiable complaint about income maldistribution and wealth maldistribution. And we end up with something that I would have never thought would be happening, and that is this homelessness that we have. That's how bad it is on one hand, and yet at the same time, where is the biggest inflation and the biggest benefits from all these programs the last 10 years? It's the super wealthy. And you say, you better watch out, Ron, you're defending the radical left. No, the radical left would like to blame freedom, free markets, and capitalism, but that isn't it. This is corporatism and inflationism, special interests. This is the deep state running things. They run the Federal Reserve, and they run our military policy. And people can get killed over challenging the military policy and the foreign policy. And it's very doctrinaire. The control by the deep state is very, very strong, and it goes on. Thank goodness there's been at least talk of moving away from it, and that has been good. But when it comes to behind the scenes activity, and people think, oh, they're fighting and fuming over impeachment. Hardly. They had to pause for a minute to spend a little bit of money, and everybody wanted to get their share. So, but they do not deal with the problems. And the problem is that just as you heard a lot of misinformation and lying and deception in the last 3 years over politics, believe me, the lying and the deceptions and the illusions and the bad economic policies of the last 20, 30 years has been, incestuous. Both sides endorse this because the universities teach it, and it's not going to get better until we have more who are thinking about what it's like to live in a free country. Not only should they think about that, they'll have to get a desire to live in a free country where they're in charge of their lives and in charge with their income. They're in charge with how they live, and that they don't have to work hard for foreign adventurism. And like I pointed out in the budget, the senators voted more strongly for foreign interventionism, and that was Republican control than they do for domestic. The whole thing is a mess, but the militarism, the military-industrial complex, and bailing out the rich, and the way the financial system works, and the way the Fed, takes care of everybody. All you have to do is go back and look at the statistics of who got bailed out, during the 08-09 crisis, and it wasn't the little guy and the average person. People are still suffering. Those people who lost their homes probably haven't been able to buy those homes since then. So it's a real mess. So hopefully, Chris, we can wake up some people and say, well, what should we do? I would say check into what we should do to help people understand what a free society would look like.
Yes, Dr. Paul, and this I'll finish up. This will be my last show for 2019. And as we approach the end of the year, America is in a bad situation. There is nowhere to turn when you get to government with Republicans and Democrats. Both have decided that it's in their interest to just lie to everybody constantly. And, but we each independently have to not be one of their parrots, because that's what you see a lot of, is just people walking around just parroting what they're told. whether it's from Pelosi, whether it's from Trump. You go on social media, it's just a repetition of the same exact line that comes from the top. That's not what America is, coming from the top. America is individual liberty, thinking independently. And it's up to each of us to separate ourselves from this con game that is going on. You know, we're all in this together, but we all have to independently survive and get through it. And the politicians are not on our side. It's unfortunate that we're the victims of their greed and lust for power. So thank you for watching me, Dr. Paul and Daniel, this year, and I'll see you in 2020.
Very, very good, Chris, and thank you for all your hard work. I want to close by an optimistic note, because as bad as it is, and I've talked about that for a long time, the optimistic part of this is that there are answers, and the answers are available, and they're going to become more necessary as time goes on. The deep state is used casually now. It's used on all the news programs, and once it's used, in common language instead of people identifying some culprits behind the scene, then it loses its effectiveness. But there is a deep state, but to me it's philosophic, and we have to identify it. And as long as people are being taught a certain philosophy, they're going to endorse this program. But the time is coming, and the numbers are growing. I remember very clearly in 1976, the first time I was elected to Congress, there was no understanding whatsoever about true free market economics, what Austrian economics was all about. They didn't even know the word. There was hardly anybody even knew what libertarianism was. And today it's different. There's a lot of people outside of Washington. We have a few in Washington. Outside of Washington, they're starting to realize this. And it's the message, it's the understanding that counts. Ideas have consequences, and it makes a difference. So we'll continue to work on the ideas. And we really believe that things are better and can get better, but we're not naive to believe, they're all rosy and all these problems are going to just fade away. No, there are going to be rough days ahead. But I too want to wish everybody a happy new year, and thanks for giving us the support over the year.